Good evening. My name is Miriam Roberts. My purpose here this evening is to discuss whether or not it's relevant to require occupational therapists to add some psychological training courses into their continuing education. We are already required to have a certain number of hours every 2 years, and certain of those hours are already designated for certain courses. I think that some psychological training would really benefit both the patient and the therapist. It's my belief that without psychological support, a patient outcome is not as effective as with a therapist who is skilled and trained with just some simple strategies that would be very useful to them from a psychological perspective. So, what is occupational therapy? Occupational therapy is focused on increasing a patient's independent skills. Most people I speak with don't really know what occupational therapy is, and they believe it has something to do with getting a job. And while that can come into play, that is not the main goal. Our main goal would be to increase a patient's independent skills so that they can return to daily activities that they were previously involved in. We want to return the patient to their prior level of functioning. So, how do we achieve that? The process includes things along the lines of physical exercise, but it also includes things like practicing their activities of daily living. Each patient is going to be unique and different, and those goals might be quite different from one patient to the next. So, I've been working in the field of occupational therapy for 15 years now. I graduated in 2007 with my degree as an occupational therapy assistant. I have worked with pediatrics as well as adult patients and young adults and geriatric patients. I've worked in school settings, I've worked in a private clinical practice, I've worked in home settings, and I have also done internships in hospitals, but I've also worked in rehab facilities. Now, all of these different settings are unique to themselves, and they've provided me with quite a range of different patients to observe over the years. I have to say, my favorite setting is the home health setting. That's where I currently work at the moment. Um, Overall, I had about 10 years' experience with pediatrics and about 10 years' experience with adult patients. About 5 of my years of experience overlapped, where I saw both patients, both adult and pediatric patients. So there are quite a few different settings that occupational therapy is provided in. I've already listed some of the settings that I've worked in, but there's also psychiatric settings, hospitalized settings, um, acute patients who have, say, just had an injury and are in the hospital, as well as long term care facilities where a patient requires help to maintain a particular set of skills. There are a lot of different types of settings. It's a very interesting career path, I have to say. Um, so, does psychology matter in the field of occupational therapy? I believe it does. I have personally seen that just a few strategies that I implement make a big difference for my patient outcomes. I have, in my years, seen quite a few different patients who initially were doing well, came to a plateau, and then at a certain point, I have to change my strategy and re-motivate them. I had one fella who was he was having a very difficult time with standing. He could only stand for about 3 minutes at a time, and he wanted his main goal was he wanted to get back to work. It was his driving motivator, and so he needed to be able to stand for at least 15 minutes at a time. Now, his goal of 15 minutes seemed impossible to him when he could only stand for 3. But I found that he liked playing cards. And so we worked at a standing table where he taught me a game called Hand and Foot. Now, when he was focused on this game, the very first day when he was teaching me the rules of this game, he stood for a total of 8 minutes without a break. And that was simply a distraction technique. That's something that I wasn't taught in school, but I did learn later. So I think that there are very significant changes that you can find for patients simply by implementing some mild strategies. Beyond that, if you can identify with a patient, if you can build that rapport with a patient, they are so motivated to work with you. and that makes a huge difference. So, in this assignment, I'd like to talk about the pros and cons of adding some of that education into the already required education that occupational therapists have to complete every 2 years. I've treated hundreds of patients over the years, and I find that motivation is the key factor that makes a difference in a patient's outcome. If they are not motivated to participate in therapy, then they're certainly not going to do it at home. And most patients, by the time they leave a therapist's care, still have work to do and they still have goals to meet. So, how can I motivate a patient? Patients are motivated by so many different factors and such variety of factors. I found for quite a few patients, they're motivated by spiritual things. They want to get back to church. They want to be able to attend those functions that they hold dear. They're motivated by family and friends and activities along those lines. Also, pets, that is a big motivator for some. They want to be able to walk their dog again, or they want to be able to take care of the cat's litter box on their own and not wait for their daughter to stop by and scoop it out for them. They want to be able to participate in sporting activities again. There's a lot of patients that I work with who want to go back to some kind of particular sporting task, like golfing or playing tennis. So there are quite a few different motivators. For some, they want to get back to a daily task that they've been unable to do, say cooking for themselves or even dressing themselves. And for others, especially in the pediatric world, lollipops work. So, let's see. So, who really wants to be in rehab? No one. No one wants to be there. They are there purely by accident, literally. Most of my patients had an accident that brought them to therapy. Now, there are, of course, other cases where, say, a surgery occurred, but no one is comfortable in a rehab setting. For some patients, they are in the midst of, say, an addiction crisis, and that is what has brought them to therapy. They don't want to be there, and they don't even understand why they need to be there. They didn't have a problem in the first place. But there's also those patients who do not understand why they are there because they do not have the cognition any longer. So those patients are especially ones that need those little psychological tricks to help you find what you can do to bring them back into focus for the task at hand. So patient outcomes. In my experience, one of the things that makes the biggest difference is human connection. Most of my patients are fully motivated by some kind of human connection, whether it's that they want to get back to living with their daughter, or if it's that they want to be able to participate in a social activity. It is a driving human force. So, how can we help? And as I said, socialization is key. So, when a patient has a significantly impacted physical issue, re-socialization can be difficult. So there are a lot of different ways that I will suggest to my patients and to their family members and friends how they can help once a patient is out of my care. Things like inviting them to join a craft group, go golfing, dinners, card games, water aerobics, horseback riding, walking, hiking, watching television, playing a card game, watching birds, gardening, blowing bubbles, building Lego, going to a park, which is great for both adults and children, and therefore it is even more motivating for both parties usually. But things along the lines of just sitting there and feeding the ducks are quite appropriate for most of my patients. My observations over the years have led me to conclude that positive patient outcomes increase when therapists take the time to consider a patient's psychological needs. Without a sensitive psychological approach, patients may retreat into themselves. They may experience depleted motivation to participate in activities designed to strengthen and empower them. In closing, I would like to remind us that the psychological needs of every person are valid and meaningful. This is incredibly true of patients who are in a recovery from surgeries, accidental injuries, addiction, or trauma. These are very vulnerable times, and to top it off, they don't even want to be there. At least no one that I have met wants to be there. It is a terribly uncomfortable setting for everyone. This fragile state must be met with kindness and compassion, as well as a safe and supportive therapist. Any one of us might find ourselves unexpectedly thrust into the rehabilitation throes. Wouldn't we all like to feel confident that the people in that place or setting are capable and trained to sympathetically push us to do our very best and to strive for the independence that we once had? I know that I would, and I believe that all of us deserve that kind of consideration and care. So let's work together, and we can make that change both for ourselves and for those that we love. Thank you, and have a good evening.